Otterly Curious is made possible in part by a grant between the HSI Equity Hub at CSU Northridge and Apple, aimed to catalyze HSI programming throughout the CSU system, statewide and nationally. Welcome to our 6th episode of Otterly Curious. Me, Angelica, one of your co-hosts, here with our 2nd co-host, Alondra.
Hello!
We are here with Elizabeth Schaefer talking about sea urchins and hypoxic treatment. So Elizabeth, what is your 6-word mission statement?
That's a great question. So my 6-word mission statement is driving innovation through science, exploration, and purpose.
And what does that mean specifically for your research projects?
That's a good question as well. So for the 2 research projects that I'll primarily be talking about, the first one is purple sea urchin specifically, under Kayla Vidal, who is at Moss Landing Marine Labs. And she is under Nathan Spindel at Moss Landing Marine Labs. And what she primarily focuses on, and what I'm focusing on with her, is how sea urchins can withstand certain levels of oxygen. So we have different tanks in different areas for different treatments of how much oxygen these sea urchins get. So I'd say in that way, with driving innovation through science, exploration, and purpose, we've been asking questions. So, exploring. We've got sea urchins. Okay, well, sea urchins are a big thing for not only biodiversity, but also for sustainable seafood. And a lot of people aren't being able to eat them and farm them right now. So what's going on with that? We start with that question. And then we go into, all right, well, does it have something to do with oxygen and what they're breathing? Can they handle hypoxic treatment, which means very low amounts of oxygen? And so in that way, that's kind of what we're going into, is we explored a certain area of the ocean, per se, and now we're asking questions.
So you brought up a bunch of different factors with sea urchins, but your main question or problem you're addressing is, what are these different levels of oxygen that sea urchins can
Withstand.
Withstand.
Yeah, specifically hypoxia. So think of it as like climate stress, right? So you're also looking at food web shifts, which aren't like abstract problems because they affect fisheries, aquaculture, and just livelihoods of people around here.
Can you walk me through the steps you take to gather and analyze your data?
Sure. So for urchins, what we do is we control hypoxia treatments, and hypoxia just means little to no oxygen. So what that looks like is lowering oxygen for certain tanks of urchins and then recording how it affects feeding and metabolism. What that looks like is we've got this tent. Imagine a tent, and it's got a big wooden plank in the center of it. And on that plank, you've got 6 main tanks. We'll call them header tanks. And those are all filled with our different treatments of what we want to put in for our tanks of sea urchins. So each one of those header tanks goes to 2 or 3 separate tanks, mostly 2 tanks of that treatment. In those 2 tanks, we will have 25 urchins each. And we will measure, like I said, either temperatures, so we're looking at different temperatures, and different amounts of oxygen affect those urchins. And then what I'm also looking at is I pair that with also dissections and histology to look at the cellular effects of those treatments as well. So when we see surrounding climate changing in vast different areas, what's interesting about urchins actually is they're very resilient. It's really hard to kill them. And they actually can withstand pretty high temperatures. The issue is when those temperatures affect different food web mechanisms and stuff in the ocean, which also affects oxygen. That's the big thing, is you get lower amounts of oxygen in the ocean. So when that starts happening, that affects urchins a lot more. They tend to just lose their spines and then they just die. So that has a bigger effect, is more the oxygen levels in the ocean and how that fluctuates in different areas.
Do you ever mix ideas from your personal life or culture into your research approach? How does that work out?
Yeah, of course. So I'm drawn to research that separates what's believed from what's measured type of thing. And so that mindset, which is questioning assumptions, is something I carry from both life and academics. Also, my background as a diver, I'm a scientific diver with CSUMB, also gives me perspective on what these animals actually experience and not just what we model on paper. Because it's very different learning about, say, urchins or different animals from a book.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely, when I was doing research, I felt empowerment, what I'm doing actually matters.
Right, yeah, exactly.
And what prior experiences have you done before this work?
Okay, so a previous project that I was working on for a while with Sarah Johnson, who's a grad student at Moss Landing Marine Labs. She is under Amanda Kahn. What Sarah was working on and what I was helping with is jellyfish energetics and calorific density. And that is just fancy words for saying how much energy does a jellyfish have. And so what we were primarily working on was 4 different species of jellyfish and the ones that are here along the coast. And we were able to dissect them and measure the energy calorific density for each individual part of the jellyfish as well as the whole of it. And the reason we were looking at that was to find out why leatherback sea turtles prefer a certain type of jellyfish, because that was our overall thing that we were looking at was leatherback sea turtles are endangered. They come here all the way from Indonesia for their food, and now they're not here a lot more. Why is that? So that's when we started looking at their food. And so that helped me a lot just with experiencing that and getting involved with that. Taught me to look at cause and effect directly and not just what should happen, but what actually does, and then being able to communicate that science into what the public can understand.
And this is exactly what this podcast is for too. So being able to communicate your research to anybody is very important. So with you mentioning your previous experiences from either project, can you give us an example of a setback?
Sure, absolutely. We had one recently happen with our sea urchins. So we take spot checks, which is where we take a temperature probe and an oxygen probe, and we go to each tank and we measure what's the dissolved oxygen content and percentage and what is the temperature. Well, one of the oxygen sensors failed overnight and it threw off an entire batch. What happened was it was reading that there was a certain level of oxygen being outputted to these tanks when it wasn't. And then all of a sudden it went from like, it says 50 to 0. And so we just worked on it. And it was frustrating, but it was a good way to like remind all of us that progress comes from systems, not just effort. So we were able to keep the urchins alive for one thing, and then just record it as a, let's say, a giant hypoxic event or whatever event for these urchins, and then built better redundancies and accepted more of that science is not precision. It's a lot more, it requires discipline and not perfectionism in it. You're going to mess up a lot. Same thing with jellyfish research. We kept having sometimes our machine for calorific density break, and it was frustrating.
Yeah, you don't realize how much technology you use until something breaks down.
Yes.
And then you're like, oh, what am I going to do now? So, another random question. You were talking about the reader saying 50 to 0. What are the units? Okay.
Oh, it's milligrams per liter. So it's percent saturation, which means how much of this water is saturated with oxygen.
Okay.
And to get that a little bit of perspective, just looking this up here real quick, is healthy aquatic systems typically have a DO level around 6.5 milligrams per liter, while levels below like 4 milligrams per liter can be really fatal to most of your like aquarium fish. And I think that's just for freshwater. I think it's very different. It depends on salinity and temperature for the ocean as well.
Okay, yeah, that does help put things into perspective. Were you just saying 50 just like as a general statement, or is it actually... Oh,
no,
okay.
it wasn't actually 50.
Okay.
Usually what we'll have for dissolved oxygen content specifically, and I can tell you right now because I just did spot checks like earlier this week, like 3.67. Okay. So that's for a really hypoxic treatment.
Who or what has inspired you to do this work?
I've been mostly inspired by other researchers who value the same things as I do. I'm inspired a lot by the classic marine scientists, Jacques Cousteau. You hear a lot about Ed Ricketts. He's very popular around here. And just a lot of different variety of scientists and people who really understood the data that they were looking at and how that helped their expectations, because it's nice in like a world of a lot of noise here and there when you have people who are grounded in science and that science is grounded in observation and not just, I don't know, something they're making up and they don't know what they're talking about. It's tends to be a lot more rare, but it's worth, I think, living for in that way. It's just making sure you're absolute about what you're learning and what you're putting out there.
That's really cool. Like, nobody on the podcast previously has mentioned like other researchers. It's mostly family based, and so
I do take inspiration from my family too. Not saying I don't. They've been great supporters. I would say that too. It's interesting because my family doesn't come from marine science background at all. My dad works in construction. He supports me, but he doesn't fully understand why marine science is why that's something that people even study. Why is it important?
Yeah.
And I think that makes it even strives me more to want to explore this area of science and the world, because it's in that way I'm not just explaining it to the general public, I'm also explaining it to my dad. I'm explaining it to my family members who don't know anything about science or don't have a lot of experience in that field.
That's a good point. I definitely resonate with having to explain to family members what I'm even doing.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, what's that? So, yeah.
They like the cool pictures. They don't know what you're doing, but they like the cool pictures.
Yeah. How does your work fit into the larger context of the field?
Sure. So marine ecosystems are constantly negotiating balance, right? So between stability and change, the ocean's always changing. When you think about the 4 seasons that we have here, there's actually seasons in the ocean, a period of time when you have upwelling, when you have more nutrients in the water at certain times of the year, and different things like that. So it also balances between efficiency and waste. And so what my research fits into is understanding how these environmental, pressures can redistribute this energy as well as opportunity across all variety of different species, and shaping who thrives and who declines, who gains the elevation in the food webs, different things like that. And you have a perfect example of the Elkhorn Slough, when the otters disappeared and the crabs took over everything in the slough, and everything just kind of grew wild. You put the otters back in, were able to manage the crabs, and now the crabs weren't eating all the nudibranchs and things that were keeping that slough nice and habitable for other creatures and things to live in there.
And what do you hope to achieve with your work, both short-term and long-term?
That is a good question. So in the short term, I would like to produce and I guess more published data. That would be nice. That it more informs how coastal management and aquaculture specifically can adapt to, let's say, what we're doing with the sea urchins, low oxygen conditions. And in the long term, I really want to find a way to be able to more bridge marine science and sustainable business together. I'm also minoring in business. So being able to find practical ways to align just ecological health and along with human incentives, rather than kind of seeing that they're always in conflict. Like you hear of overfishing, and so you're all constantly wanting to put regulations on the fishermen, and then it upsets the scientists because the scientists need their fish there and different things like that. So that's kind of my long-term thing. It's how can we find a bridge between that?
That's interesting how they connect, because I've actually never heard of a marine science major with a business minor.
I know, me either.
But I really like that because they do connect. And I mean, we see it with, salmon farms and stuff
Absolutely.
like that. So, yeah, that's really interesting. Those are things that I didn't even think about. I never sat down and connected the dots,
Right, exactly. It's something that's behind the scenes a little bit more. And I like that. I like being behind the scenes and then seeing the effect of all that.
Yeah.
I like knowing I like knowing what's going on behind and seeing the effect of what little things you're doing behind the scenes that affect everybody else. I like that a lot.
So what has been the most surprising or rewarding aspect of your research so far?
I love that question because initially thinking about research going into it, what am I going to be most surprised by? And I think going into it, I was thinking, it's the different mechanisms I'll learn about. But I think right now is just learning how much endurance nature already has. And like I was saying with urchins, they can tolerate a lot of conditions that would wipe out other species. And so it's, I think, been a great reminder of how life adapts, and often better than we give it credit for. And so it's more of a, I guess, humbling perspective that the ocean needs a lot more understanding, not so much of like the saving aspect, and more just understand what's going on in it first.
We have one last question for you to start wrapping this up. What advice would you give to someone trying to start their own research project?
I think to somebody brand new into it is don't chase trends. Don't chase what you see everybody else going for. Define your question. Make sure to test that. Test it rigorously, and then be ready to be wrong. Because data isn't really an argument. It's a discovery process. And the goal to remember is that it's not to prove that you're right, it's to find out what's true. And you sometimes often have either your peers or even professors that'll tell you something. Don't just take their word for it, investigate into it. And that'll lead you to different research projects too. Into seeing, oh, well, that's something that my professor said was this way, but I see this thing here. Could I do a research project on that and investigate further? And maybe you might find something that no one even thought about asking about.
So what you're saying is, stay utterly curious.
That's a good way to put it, yeah, stay curious.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for joining us in this episode of Otterly Curious. It was very interesting learning about your research. I do like the ocean, wildlife, stuff like that, but I don't really get the chance to dive deep. Get it?
Great pun.
Thank you. But yeah, I had a lot of fun.
Well, thank you for having me. Really
Yeah.
appreciate it this time.
It was really interesting hearing about your work with urchins and stuff, and we were working in the same lab, so it's nice to hear like your perspective on the caloric density with the jellyfish and kind of connecting those two, and like the business minor. I really like that part as well.
Thank you everyone for tuning in to our 6th episode of Otterly Curious. We hope you come back soon.
See you next time.
Bye.
The UROC Innovation Scholars Program at CSU Monterey Bay is funded by the CSUN HSI Equity Innovation Hub and Apple, supporting undergraduate researchers working on faculty-mentored research. Scholars develop a curated research identity through the development of a digital e-portfolio for the STEAM workforce or a graduate school.